Chapter 1. The Day Everything Broke. My name is Rowan Kane, and I spent most of my life believing that loyalty, especially within a family, was something sacred. I survived war zones, cyber breaches, and nights when the world felt one wrong keystroke away from collapsing. But nothing scarred me the way my own blood did. Before anyone accused me of anything, the people who raised me had already traded my trust for paperwork, signatures, and silence. They stole my name first, then my identity, then the house that held every version of the child I used to be. And when the lies finally reached the courtroom, I realized something I should have seen years ago. You can serve your country with everything you have and still lose the battle that begins at your own front door. And that truth was waiting for me the moment I stepped into that courtroom. The clerk mispronounced my name, and somehow that felt like the first cut of the day. I sat at the defense table inside the Multnomah County Courthouse in downtown Portland. The ceiling lights hummed overhead. The air was dry. The benches behind me creaked whenever someone shifted. I had spent years inside secure facilities, sometimes underground, sometimes in rooms with no windows or clocks. But none of them felt as hostile as this courtroom, maybe because of who was sitting on the other side of it. My family looked arranged rather than seated. My mother, Linda, sat closest to the aisle, her hands folded tight, eyes fixed above the judge's head. My father, Charles, stared at his knees, occasionally letting his face tighten as if holding back tears. My younger brother, Caleb, sat straight-backed in a charcoal suit he probably bought for the occasion. Beside him was his wife, Tessa, holding a tissue she had not yet used. Their attorney, Monica Hale, stood between them and the bench, calm, controlled. Her voice filled the room without rising. She spoke about me as if she had known me all my life. She told the judge that I had become unstable, that years in military cyber operations had damaged my ability to judge right from wrong, that I had pressured my parents into signing documents they did not understand, that I had used my trauma as leverage. I listened to her outline my life in pieces. I kept my hands flat on the table so no one would notice the tension in them. Her words moved cleanly, shaping a version of me that would scare a judge into action. A daughter turned manipulator, a veteran who could not be trusted, a threat wrapped in uniform colors that had never been hers to speak of. She gestured toward my parents. My mother blinked fast, as if overwhelmed. My father let out a breath that sounded rehearsed. Their attorney talked about undue influence. She used phrases like vulnerable elders and concerning behavioral patterns. She described my silence as evidence of emotional instability. I looked at my mother. She did not look back. She kept her gaze pointed straight at the state seal on the wall. I wondered if she thought that seal could rescue her. My father glanced at the gallery more often than at me. When our eyes met briefly, he looked away as if the meeting itself burned. Caleb maintained his posture, hands clasped lightly on the table, expression calm in a way that came off as practiced. The last time I had seen him in my parents' kitchen, he wore an old hoodie and asked me to stop interfering. Now he looked like a man ready to let a judge believe anything said about me. Tessa kept her eyes down, but lifted them now and then, her face arranged into concern. She had always been good at that, shaping empathy to whatever scene she wanted to play. The judge listened, patient, asking only occasional questions. On paper, the case was simple. Elderly parents petitioning the court for protection against a daughter they claimed was taking advantage. On paper, I looked like a problem the court needed to manage. While Monica continued, a small memory rose so suddenly it startled me. A school auditorium. I was 10. Bright cutout snowflakes taped across a plywood stage. My class stood in a row wearing blue paper hats for the winter concert. I spotted my parents in the third row. My mother waved. My father lifted his hand in a small, proud gesture. Halfway through the third song, I checked the row again. Their seats were empty, their coats gone. My aunt sat 2 rows back with Caleb in her lap. He had a chocolate smear on his cheek. Later, I would hear my mother say some children were easier to love. At 10, I just kept singing. The memory faded, replaced by the courtroom's fluorescent glare. Tessa rolls next. She held the tissue delicately, looked toward the judge, kept her tone soft. She said I had changed, that my deployments had left me distant, that I seemed detached from family events, that she was worried about my mental state. She told the court that I was afraid I might make choices that would harm my parents without meaning to. I watched her. She was careful. She spoke like someone offering concern, not accusation. She made it sound like she was trying to help me by taking power away from me. I could have cut in. I could have told her the time she called me asking how to reset my parents' online account and how she watched me type the passwords. I could have listed every moment she learned something she should not have known. Instead, I stayed quiet. Silence mattered here. A steady voice meant more than an argument. Inside, the accusations landed and settled. I had asked myself those questions already. Had I changed more than I realized? Had I grown too detached? Had I missed something obvious? Those questions had lived with me longer than anyone in this room had bothered to ask. But then I remembered the bank logs, the veterans program transfers, the forged signatures, the nested company records. Silence was not confusion. Silence was restraint. Monica finished and asked the judge to freeze my access to anything belonging to my parents. She requested immediate removal of my name from their accounts and legal rights. She shaped it as protecting them. My attorney leaned toward me. He whispered about objecting, about the burden of proof. I heard him, but my mind had already moved to the single sheet inside my jacket. The judge looked at me after Monica sat down. He asked me if I wanted to respond. I stood. The courtroom quieted. I could feel their attention shifting. Even my mother looked up a little, eyelids trembling. I said that before any ruling was made, I wanted the judge to review a document that had direct relevance to the petition. My voice stayed even. I did not apologize. I did not explain. I simply spoke. I walked toward the bench and placed the folded page on the polished surface. The judge reached for it, opened it, and read. His eyes moved faster the farther he got. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. The room held its breath. My mother glanced at my father. Caleb's posture twitched as if bracing for something he had not expected. Tessa's fingers tightened on her tissue. The judge asked the clerk to call a recess. His tone had changed, subtle but unmistakable. He said new information required review. The bailiff announced the break. People rose from the benches, voices spread in low murmurs. Chairs scraped. My parents gathered their papers with shaking hands. I stayed standing for a moment, letting the shift settle inside me. They had told their story. They had shaped their version of who I was. Now, the truth had entered the room, and truth has its own weight. I walked back to my table. If anyone was going to understand why that document existed, I would have to go back to the beginning. Chapter 2. The first cracks. It started with an email I should never have received. A cold January morning, early 2023. I was at my kitchen table with the last of my coffee cooling in the mug. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that should have felt peaceful but instead just made everything sharper. When I refreshed my inbox, an official message from the Department of Veterans Affairs sat at the top. Approval notice. Emergency relief application. I opened it. My name, my masked social security number, a confirmation that funds had been released to the bank account on file. It listed deployment dates, including operations that had never been public, information buried deep in restricted systems. My pulse did not spike. It dropped, settling into the steady, alert rhythm that had kept me alive more than once. Someone had filed a claim in my name. Someone with access to data I had never shared. I forwarded the email and called the one person who would not ask unnecessary questions. Nate Collins answered with the background noise of a federal office behind him. I told him what I had received. I told him I had not filed anything. I told him the deployment data inside the message was too specific to be coincidence. He said he would run it right away. When he called back, his voice was low and tight. He told me the application was real. The relief funds had been sent, then moved almost immediately to another account. Not mine. An account in Washington state that had only existed for a few months. I asked for the last 4 digits. They meant nothing to me. He asked if I had signed anything at a clinic or with a representative. I told him no. There was a short silence, the kind that sits between two people who both understand exactly what something means without wanting to say it. After we ended the call, I sat at the table with the laptop still open, the email glowing on the screen like a warning flare. I replayed the steps someone would need to take to file that application. They would need my identifying data. They would need the confidence to use it. They would believe I would not be paying attention. I opened the county property records next. The house I grew up in appeared instantly. The owner name did not. It was listed under Evergreen Ridge Partners. Transfer value, $1. Transfer date, 3 months old. A company I had never heard of now owned my parents' home. A company whose address on file matched a rented mailbox across the river. A company no one in my family had mentioned. My throat tightened. Not fear, recognition. I drove to Portland that afternoon. The house looked normal. My childhood always did. The porch light was on even though it was afternoon. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She looked tired, guarded, like someone bracing for an impact she hoped would miss her. She asked why I was there. I told her I needed everyone in one room. She led me to the kitchen. My father sat at the table. Caleb and Tessa stood by the counter. No greetings, no warmth, just waiting faces. I explained the email, the account that was not mine, the transfer logs Nate had found, the incorrect routing information. Then I told them about the house, Evergreen Ridge Partners, the deed transfer, the $1. My mother stiffened. My father's eyes darted sideways. Caleb shifted, straightened, and finally spoke. He told me this was all estate planning. He said my parents needed someone who was present, someone who understood paperwork. He said he had everything under control and that I was overreacting. I asked if he honestly believed that choosing silence for months could erase signatures. I asked who Evergreen Ridge Partners really was. Caleb's jaw tightened. He said I had been gone too long to understand what this family needed. Tessa put a hand on his arm and said gently that I had been under stress for years, that maybe things looked threatening to me that were not actually dangerous, that it made sense I saw patterns where others saw normal life. I looked at my parents. Their eyes slid away. The message was clear. Whatever Caleb had done or arranged, they had allowed it, maybe encouraged it. I left without raising my voice. That would have made this into an argument between siblings. I needed it to stay what it was: evidence. The story hit the news 3 days later. Manipulative veteran accused of exploiting elderly parents. My service photo next to shots of my parents walking up courthouse steps between Caleb and Tessa. The anchors used soft concern, the kind reserved for family tragedies. They repeated phrases from the petition like they had been carved into stone. My phone buzzed with messages. Former colleagues said they were sorry. Some told me I should lay low. Others advised I request leave to keep the situation from escalating. I said I would think about it. I meant none of it. A few days later, I walked to the cafe my mother used to take me to when I was small. The same tables, the same windows, the same worn counter. I sat near the front and tried to drink something warm while the television overhead replayed the news segment about my case. People glanced between the screen and me. No one spoke. The distance between knowing the truth and convincing anyone else of it felt wider than the street outside. The envelope came the next afternoon. A county recorder packet, probably meant for my parents but forwarded incorrectly. Inside was certified copies of recent documents, trust agreements, the deed transfer. I laid the pages out on my kitchen table. Evergreen Ridge Partners listed as owner. My parents' signatures at the bottom. And next to my father's looping signature, a faint crescent of blue ink, a tiny smear in the exact pattern I had once seen on Caleb's cuffs throughout his job at a print shop. The same blue ink that always leaked slightly when he tapped the pen against paper. That mark pulled every scattered suspicion into a single line. This was not carelessness. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate rerouting of assets, identities, and access. And someone in my own family did it with enough confidence to believe I would never ask the right questions. I sat back in my chair, the room silent around me. There was no more room for doubt. The next step would not be asking them why. It would be finding out how far it reached.
Chapter 3. The Shadow Underneath. I cleared my kitchen table the same night. Every piece of mail, every stray pen, every dish. I needed space to think. Years in cyber operations taught me that chaos is the enemy of accuracy. A clean surface always made room for a sharper mind. I opened my laptop and built a simple grid. Names, dates, transfers, accounts. I typed the numbers I had collected so far. The veteran relief case, the Evergreen Ridge transfer, the routing logs Nate mentioned, the deed. Then I began looking outward. Evergreen Ridge Partners appeared in more places than a shell company should. Small payments, contractor reimbursements, micro-transfers connected to veteran outreach services. Nothing big enough to trigger audits. Everything placed just under thresholds that automated systems rarely question. I checked the business registry next. The address matched the Vancouver mailbox I had seen earlier. The listed management company had the kind of name designed to mean nothing. The lawyer on file was one I had seen in small estate disputes before. None of it made sense until I pictured Caleb's hand in it. He had always been good at making shortcuts look like solutions. I wrote Evergreen Ridge on the grid. I drew a line from it to the deed transfer, another to the relief funds. Then I went looking for anything that linked my parents to a service provider. That was when Riverlight Therapy surfaced, a practice owned by my sister-in-law, Tessa. Camas address, established in 2019, a bright website with soft colors and carefully chosen language about healing and resilience. A section dedicated to veterans. I stared at her tiny headshot for a long second before digging deeper. From public insurance data, I could see billing patterns, dates, procedure codes, claim amounts, enough to build relationships without names. A handful of entries stood out immediately. 6 claims, coded as intensive trauma sessions, all submitted under the veteran program, all reimbursed at high rates. The dates were recent, the details too familiar. I cross-checked claim numbers with a list of known veterans from an organization I volunteered with, and that was when I saw Thomas Avery's ID. He had been a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps. I had once worked with him during a joint debrief. Tough man, quiet eyes, honest. The kind of person who kept his word even when it cost him something. I still had his number. I called. He answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was tired, but strong. I told him who I was. He said he remembered me. He even laughed a little when he did. I asked if he had ever gone to a therapy clinic in Camas, a place named Riverlight, owned by someone named Tessa Kane. There was a pause. Then he said no. He told me his VA therapist was in Hillsborough. He repeated the clinic name back to me, slower this time, to be sure he was not forgetting something. He said he had never heard of it. I thanked him. I wanted to say more, to warn him, but I needed proof before I dragged him into something bigger than both of us. I ended the call. My hand shook only once after. I wrote his name in the grid, a new line under the others. Then the phone rang again. The number was unfamiliar. I answered without speaking. There was breathing, slow, steady, muffled. Then a voice filtered through distortion software that was cheap enough to leave its edges visible. It said my name the way my brother says it when he is annoyed, the way my mother says it when she is disappointed. Quiet, controlled. Then it told me to stop. I asked who it was. The voice ignored the question. It told me I did not understand what I was walking into, that this was not personal, that my parents were old, that I should think twice before upsetting fragile people. I felt my muscles in my jaw lock. I said if the caller was worried about my parents, they should stop stealing from them. I said I recognized digital fingerprints better than they did. I said I built systems like these for a living, and I knew how to follow patterns no matter how carefully someone tried to hide them. There was a pause. Then the voice said I should let it go. The call ended. I saved the timestamp and number. Evidence is evidence even when the voice behind it tries to stay hidden. Over the next few days, I noticed a car parked near my building. A gray sedan, sunshade in the windshield, no movement, no figures inside. Always the same spot, always at odd hours. Not surveillance from professionals, too obvious. Probably someone told to keep an eye on my place without understanding what real surveillance looked like. I wrote down the license plate and ran it legally through contacts I still had access to. Rental car, paid in cash, at a small riverfront location. Someone was worried. That was confirmation, not intimidation. I knew I had reached the point where working alone risked crossing legal boundaries, or worse, missing something crucial. I needed people I trusted, people who knew how to read between the lines, the way I did. I called Anna Reeve. She answered on the 2nd ring. I told her I needed her eyes on something, and she told me to tell her everything from the beginning. I went through the grid point by point. The relief funds, Evergreen Ridge, Riverlight, the deed, the call, the car. Anna listened without interrupting. When she finished, she blew out a breath and said she could already see 3 red flags from a federal perspective. She said she would pull payment pathways, but she wanted to meet in person, somewhere quiet, somewhere that did not log visitor data. Her cousin had a cabin near North Bend, I drove there 2 days later. The place sat at the edge of a dense tree line, weathered siding, a porch that sloped a little to the left. When I stepped inside, it smelled like cedar and old coffee grounds. Anna sat at a table with her laptop open. Miles, a younger analyst she trusted, leaned against the counter typing. Cole stood near the window with a yellow legal pad. Anna hugged me once, and she said she had run initial checks. Evergreen Ridge had been receiving small payments from programs designed to support veterans. Payments would break into smaller transactions, then shift to foreign-linked entities. One of them was Arvos International, a name I recognized from an operation years ago, connected to attempted access on defense contractor systems. She turned the screen toward me. Lines on a digital map linked Oregon to Cyprus and 2 other regions. Nothing huge, nothing splashy, just small transfers hidden beneath noise. Miles explained that the signatures in the code patterns matched other flagged incidents. Someone was moving money through systems that were supposed to help people like me. Cole asked me to walk him through every moment I might have shared sensitive information with family. I remembered nights at the kitchen table, setting up online accounts, times I typed passwords while Tessa watched, moments my parents said they could trust Caleb to handle things because I was always too busy. We worked until the sun fell behind the ridge. We dug through logs and mapped timelines. When the outline became clear enough that none of us could pretend it was a coincidence, Anna said we needed a source inside the banking chain, someone who had touched the data, someone who had noticed something off. That someone was Michael Tran. He had flagged suspicious activity inside a regional bank downtown. His alerts had been overridden by a supervisor. He had noted it and then moved on. I reached out and asked to meet. We sat in a coffee shop on his lunch break. He kept glancing at the door. His hands shook slightly as he stirred melting ice in his drink. He said he was not supposed to talk about internal files. I told him he understood. I told him the stolen funds involved veterans who had already lost too much. I told him one of those names was mine. He looked down at his cup and said he had copied the transfer logs before closing the alert. He didn't know why he did it. Something just felt wrong. He slid a small thumb drive across the table. When I thanked him, he nodded once, eyes still fixed on his hands. That night, back home, I plugged the drive in. The files opened into a chain of movements. Funds from the veteran program routed into Evergreen Ridge accounts, broken into smaller amounts, moved to Arvos International and 2 other foreign entities. Internal notes approving each step. Trusted partner, client cleared. Then came the application file with my name, the forged signature, the routing number linked to the account Nate mentioned, the internal comment listing family representative, the line C. Kane written in a way that made my stomach twist. Someone had planted my identity at the base of the entire chain. If the structure collapsed, without context, the trail would end exactly where they wanted it to. I sat back. The room felt smaller again. My own name sat at the bottom of a fraud map that spanned states and crossed borders. They had not only expected me to stay quiet, they had built the system so that if I spoke, I would be the one buried under it.
Chapter 4. Facing the people who share my name. By the time I reached Seattle the next morning, I knew exactly what I needed to say, and exactly what I would not allow myself to expect. Their street looked the same, quiet, familiar, houses lined in an orderly row like memories stacked too neatly to be trusted. My parents' home stood in the middle of it, white trim, weathered mailbox, the same porch light that had stayed on my entire childhood, a place that held years of moments that now felt like someone else's life. I walked up the steps and knocked. My mother answered quickly, almost like she had been waiting behind the door. Her face tightened the moment she saw me. She said my name softly, the way someone speaks to a stranger they used to know. I asked if I could come in. She hesitated, then stepped back. Inside the house, everything looked unchanged. Same framed family photos, same thrift store rug, Same kitchen smell of coffee and citrus, but the air felt different, heavy with decisions that had already been made long before I arrived. My father sat in the living room. He looked up when I entered, but his expression stayed guarded. He said hello in a tone that aimed for warmth but could not hold it. Caleb was not in sight, but I knew he was home. The house felt watched. I sat in the armchair across from them. I told myself to keep my voice steady, to stay calm, to say only what mattered. I opened my bag and placed a folder on the table. The same table where my mother used to cut birthday cakes, where my father once helped me with school projects, where Caleb used to spill juice and laugh like nothing he did could ever be wrong. I told them everything. Evergreen Ridge, the relief funds filed without my consent, River Light Therapy and the patients who never walked through its doors, the overseas transfers, the routing logs, the forged signature, the internal note listing C. Kane. I expected shock or denial or even anger that I was accusing the wrong people. Instead, they were quiet. Quiet in a way that made my stomach twist. I pushed the folder closer to them. My mother looked at it like it was a fire she could not put out. My father stared so long at the carpet that I wondered if he hoped I would disappear between the fibers. I asked when they had signed the house over. My mother slowly said she could not remember the exact day. I laid the deed in front of her. The faint smear of blue ink was visible, even in the soft lamplight. She blinked and looked at me. Her voice cracked slightly when she said Caleb had handled it, that he told them it was better this way, that things would be simpler, that they did not want to bother me. Then my father spoke. His voice was low. He said they had to think about their future, that they were getting older, that they needed someone who was here. He tapped the table gently as he said here, as if proximity was the only measure of love worth counting. I told him Caleb had not protected them. He had used them. The Veterans Program funds, the foreign transfers, the forged application. The patterns were undeniable. My mother shook her head. She said I was misreading things. She said Caleb was the one who stayed, that he was there on holidays, that he fixed things when they broke. She said I had left. She said maybe I could not understand because I had always been too self-reliant. Something cracked inside me at those words. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a slow pressure, like metal giving way beneath weight it had carried too long. I asked her if she remembered the winter when Caleb drove off after a fight in the school parking lot, when I had walked home alone in freezing rain, 5 miles, shoes soaked, hands numb. When I walked through the door, she had said kids fight. She had told me not to make everything a crisis. The room stayed silent. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I realized then, with the clarity that felt like ice water, that what had happened in the past few months was not a break. It was a continuation, the same pattern, the same choice, the same story they told themselves to sleep better at night. I said quietly that family is choice, that I was not the one who stopped choosing. My mother looked away. My father rubbed his forehead. Neither answered. For a moment, my chest felt heavy in a way that no battlefield had ever made it feel, the kind of weight that comes from recognizing that the people you spent a lifetime trying to protect never learned how to see you at all. I stood, slowly, calmly, and I said I had not come to fight. I had come to tell them the truth before someone else did. I told them there were consequences coming, that federal investigators were involved, that their signatures were on documents that mattered more than they understood. My mother whispered she never meant for things to go so far. My father said nothing. I picked up the folder and walked to the door. The house felt colder than the air outside. When I stepped onto the porch, wind pushed against me. I zipped my jacket and moved down the steps. Something made me look up. An upstairs curtain shifted. Behind it, a figure stood still, watching. Caleb. His face was not startled or ashamed. It was calculating, focused, the expression of someone assessing the next move, someone who thought he could still outmaneuver whatever storm was coming. We stared at each other through the thin fabric. For a second, the entire house felt like a loaded spring. Then he stepped back. I walked to my car without turning around again. As I drove away, the weight in my chest did not lessen. It settled. Not like defeat, more like acceptance. The past was no longer a question. It was a map, and every line on it pointed to what needed to happen next. Chapter 5. The Weight of Truth. The courthouse felt different the morning of the final hearing, as if everyone inside sensed something shifting before a word was spoken. Even the security guard at the entrance paused a heartbeat longer while checking my ID, like he knew the day would not end quietly. Inside the courtroom, tension sat in the air like a storm waiting to break. My parents sat close together, hands knotted, eyes down. My mother looked like she hadn't slept. My father looked carved out of stone. Caleb sat upright beside them, face tight, jaw locked. Tessa held a tissue she kept folding but never actually used. Attorney Monica Hale rose first, her voice steady, her expression carefully sympathetic. She repeated her claims about my instability, my silence, my supposed detachment from reality. She framed it as concern from my parents. She framed me as unpredictable. It was a legal strategy designed to look gentle while cutting the deepest. I let her talk. When she finished, the judge turned his attention to me. He asked if I had anything I wished to present. I stood. My attorney handed him the document we had held until this moment. The judge unfolded it. His eyes moved across the page, then again. His expression hardened slightly. He read the next page, then the next, and by the time he reached the final line, the temperature in the room felt different. He instructed the bailiff to seal the courtroom. 2 federal agents stepped through the side door. Plain suits, badges flashed only once. The first agent approached Caleb, addressed him formally, and listed the charges: fraud, identity theft, misuse of federal funds, attempts to route sensitive data through foreign-linked entities. Caleb didn't move until the cuffs clicked around his wrists. The sound was sharper than it needed to be. Tessa jerked to her feet, voice cracking as she insisted she had been forced, that she was innocent, that she only did what Caleb asked. The second agent approached and listed her charges: filing fraudulent claims, participating in routed funds, falsifying therapy logs. My attorney requested permission to reference the federal file. The judge allowed it. He pointed out email threads originating from Tessa's own address, outlining instructions on how to code sessions, maximize reimbursements, and route excess funds through Evergreen Ridge. Her face crumpled. Whatever performance she had saved for the judge fell apart. As the agents guided them toward the exit, Caleb leaned slightly toward me. His voice was low. They made me this way. For a moment, something inside me shifted. Not forgiveness, just understanding. A brief, painful recognition of the boy he had been and the man our parents had shaped. A man who grew up learning someone would always rescue him. Someone would always clean up his messes. Someone would always take the fall. Not this time. Behind him, my mother broke into uneven sobs, whispering that they only wanted him to succeed. My father stayed silent, eyes fixed on the table. When order returned, the judge announced his decision. The petition against me was denied. There was no evidence I had exploited my parents. Instead, evidence showed they had been drawn into a scheme operated by the very people accusing me. He recommended my parents' finances be placed under temporary oversight of a neutral third party until the investigation concluded. Then he asked if I had anything further. I said yes. I requested immediate notification to the Department of Veterans Affairs and local veteran organizations. I asked for a full review of every veteran whose name had appeared in claims processed through Riverlights or Evergreen Ridge. I said they deserved to know the truth, that whatever happened to my family, their protection mattered first. The judge nodded and ordered it entered into the record. When the hearing adjourned, I stepped outside. The sky was pale and washed out. Reporters gathered on the steps, shouting questions. My attorney fielded them. I walked past the noise, past the cameras, past the courthouse where my family had tried to bury me. Later, in my apartment, the silence was no longer the heavy kind. It felt real, honest, the kind that follows a truth finally spoken out loud. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas Avery. He said someone from the VA had called him, that fraudulent claims in his name were being erased, that an investigation was underway, that he didn't know what I had done, but he knew it mattered. I stood there for a long moment with the phone in my hand. Justice doesn't heal, but it clears a path. It loosens the weight enough to breathe again. I knew my family would never be the same. My parents now had to face the son they had built and the daughter they had tried to silence. Caleb and Tessa faced consequences no one could shield them from. But I chose truth over blood. So now I leave the question with you. If the truth meant standing alone, would you choose it? If exposing what was wrong cost you the people who shared your name, would you still walk into the light with it? I know what I chose, and I'm still here to tell it. The rest is yours to decide.